The Yellow Wallpaper. The house was chosen for me, though no one said it quite that way. It stood at a distance from everything familiar, wrapped in quiet fields and tall hedges that muffled sound. It was large, orderly, and unmistakably temporary, the kind of place meant to hold people, not welcome them. My husband said it would do me good. Fresh air, solitude, rest. He spoke gently, confidently, as someone accustomed to certainty. He was a physician. He knew what was best. I had been tired for some time, anxious without reason, or so he believed. My thoughts wandered. My emotions refused to stay neatly arranged. He said my mind needed discipline, not stimulation. I agreed because disagreeing only exhausted me further. The house had many rooms, but he chose one. It was on the upper floor, large and bright, with tall windows that flooded the space with light. He said cheerfulness mattered. I noticed the bed first, heavy, immovable, fixed to the floor as though it had been placed there long ago and never questioned since. The windows were wide, yet oddly constrained by their frames. The walls bore faint marks, not quite scratches, but signs of repeated contact. And then there was the wallpaper. It was yellow, not the color of warmth or sunlight, but a tired, unsettling shade that seemed resistant to change. The pattern was chaotic, full of abrupt curves and pointless repetitions. It did not flow. It fought itself. Looking at it too long made my eyes ache, as if the design resented being understood. I asked if it could be replaced. My husband smiled indulgently. He said I was fixating on trivialities. He reminded me that my imagination was precisely the problem. I felt foolish for having spoken at all, so the room became my world. My days were structured around rest. I was discouraged from writing, from reading anything too stimulating, from engaging my thoughts beyond the most practical matters. Visitors were rare, conversation brief. My husband checked on me often, pleased by my compliance, reassured by my quietness. Time slowed. With nothing else to claim my attention, my gaze returned again and again to the walls. At first, I hated the wallpaper simply because it was ugly. Then, gradually, it began to trouble me for deeper reasons. The pattern resisted logic. Lines curved suddenly, then collapsed. Shapes suggested meaning, then withdrew it. No matter how closely I studied it, it refused resolution. It felt deliberate, not careless, but calculated to confuse. At night, the room changed. Shadows deepened the yellow into something murkier. The pattern appeared less fixed, as though it shifted when I wasn't watching directly. I told myself it was exhaustion, that restlessness made ordinary things strange, yet I began to watch more carefully. Over time, I noticed a second design beneath the first, faint, almost invisible at first. It moved differently, slower, constrained. The realization came gradually with a certainty that startled me. It was not part of the pattern. It was a woman. She appeared bent, pressed against the surface, as if the wallpaper itself held her down. She crept along the lines, never stepping beyond them, learning their limits with careful persistence. The pattern restrained her, tangled around her like a net. I felt an unexpected connection. During the day, she faded into near invisibility, subdued by the light. But as evening approached, she returned, clearer, more defined. I began to wait for her appearance, watching for the subtle signs that announced her presence. I did not tell my husband. He said I was improving. He praised my calm, my restraint. I learned to look away from the walls when he entered, to redirect my attention elsewhere. He seemed relieved, convinced that quiet obedience meant recovery. But the wallpaper held my focus more than ever. The woman behind it grew familiar. I noticed how she tested the pattern, how she learned its weaknesses. Sometimes she shook it gently, as if measuring its strength. Other times she simply watched me, not accusingly, but knowingly. Slowly, understanding took shape. The pattern was not decoration. It was confinement disguised as order. A structure designed to exhaust, to disorient, to convince those trapped within it that escape was impossible. And the woman had learned what I was only beginning to grasp. Freedom required patience, attention, and persistence. So I stopped wishing to leave the room. Instead, I observed. I studied. I waited. At night, my dreams filled with yellow, the wallpaper spreading beyond the room, creeping down corridors, covering the house entirely. In these dreams, the woman moved freely at last, upright and unrestrained. When I woke, I felt a quiet urgency. The wallpaper began to look worn. Where it once dominated the room, it now appeared fragile, as though strained by scrutiny. I traced its lines with my eyes, then with my fingers, following its twists until my movements matched those of the woman behind it. We mirrored each other. I began locking the door more often, not out of fear, but necessity. The room and I needed privacy. My husband noticed my growing silence and mistook it for peace. He praised my progress. I thanked him calmly. The final day arrived without warning. Sunlight poured into the room, revealing how much the wallpaper had deteriorated. The pattern sagged, uncertain of itself. I closed the door and kept the key close. There was something that needed to be finished. As the hours passed, the boundary between pattern and figure dissolved. The wallpaper loosened its hold, no longer able to sustain the illusion of control. The woman stepped forward, not out of the walls, but through them until there was no distinction between her and me. When my husband returned, the room no longer looked the same. The walls were stripped of their confusion. The space felt open, almost calm. I moved steadily along the perimeter, following a path I knew by heart. I did not stop when he spoke. "I've finally done it," I said evenly. "You can't put me back." He stood frozen, unable to understand what he saw. But I understood. The room no longer confined me. I had learned its language, unraveled its pattern, and stepped beyond the role it assigned. Whether the world outside could comprehend this no longer mattered. I was no longer waiting to be rescued. I had claimed myself.